the recent times, Ukrainian government has made it loud that it would struggle to reclaim all of its recognized territory. Not only the districts that Russia has seized since its attack in February, but all of the land they have captured since the beginning of the year 2014. This includes one of its important region, Crimea, which Russia took back in a hurried and unreliable vote 8 years ago. When the terrible war started, it seemed very doubtful that a battle for Crimea would ever happen, as the Ukrainians had to focus all their energy on pushing back Russian forces. But now the tables have turned and Ukrainian leaders are hopeful that they will soon take back Crimea, as this is the right of their people. If you are new on my channel, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video in your circle. Crimea holds such an emotional importance in the hearts of the people that many Ukrainians feel that reclaiming Crimea is the only way to end the 8 years armed struggle with Russia. And this is only how they call it, a victory. Even the majority of Ukrainians believe this is the only logical solution to the conflict. Whereas if we flip the coin and take a look on the Russian side, we see that the 2014 occupation is restoring a historically wrongdone on them by the end of the Cold War, and Crimea has taken on a new meaning for them. Thus, it is equally important for Russians to have Crimea, otherwise it would be quite shameful for them to losing it, knowing the purpose of the war was to extend the Russian territory. This leads to the statement that taking back Crimea wouldn't be an easy fight for both countries. The United States and its allies in Europe have a lot riding on the situation in Ukraine. They say that Crimea is a part of Ukraine and they will keep supporting Ukraine until Russia leaves. The USA officials say that Crimea is a part of Ukraine and they will provide all sorts of support to acquire it back from Russia. But privately, some Western leaders, such as the former White House ambassador, think Crimea might need to be treated differently, as there may occur military and other challenges. Thus, they are careful when they talk about Crimea, because they are worried about the military situation and things getting worse. This year, Ukraine has been doing better in the war than people expected, and its allies have been supporting them strongly. They have been working well together, but in the future, the situation in Crimea might be the biggest problem for this partnership between Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, and its allies. How much severe this fight could be? It's tough to say what the Ukrainian soldiers will face in Crimea because the number of enemy soldiers keeps changing. It is noticed that the Sevastopol, a city in Crimea which was famous for holding fleets, is severely armed by Russians. Crimea is a place with lots of weapons and soldiers, and even before the war started, there were over 31,000 Russian soldiers there. The Russian army might send more soldiers to help, but they might not be the strongest fighters. The closer the Ukrainian soldiers get to Crimea, the harder it will be to win because the enemy will have more and stronger soldiers to fight them. Fighting in Crimea will probably be really tough, like it was when they were fighting for a place called Kherson. Many Ukrainian soldiers got hurt while fighting for Kherson, and it will be even harder in Crimea. As we see, in recent times the Ukrainian soldier had a really hard time fighting for Kherson, where the fight continued for months and many casualties occurred on the Ukrainian side in exchange for a very small land retrieve. Thus, the officials say the fight in Crimea will be even harder than the one fought in Kherson. How much harsh is the geography of this peninsula? Ukraine faces a challenge in terms of geography when it comes to the situation in Crimea. Due to the limited amphibious landing capabilities of Ukraine, any attack on Crimea would require a ground attack. The land between Ukraine and Crimea is mostly made up of swampy lagoons known as the Savyash or Rotten Sea, with narrow land paths that change with the tides, so it is very difficult to plan an effective strategy. There are more challenges for the Ukrainian army besides the geography. In winters, it is harder for the army to move around. When spring comes, some areas become so muddy that it's impossible to get through. Alina Frolova, a former Ukrainian deputy defense minister, said that even though the explosion on the bridge between Crimea and Russia made it harder for Russians to bring supplies to Crimea, the bridge is still partly working and the Russian army there has more supplies than the Ukrainian army in some parts of eastern Ukraine. Alina Frolova thinks that the Ukrainian army can't start a big attack on Crimea until they decrease the number of Russian naval forces there. If they don't, they will have a hard time winning. Recently, there have been some attacks on the port city in Crimea using drones. The Ukrainian army is asking the United States for help by giving them long-range missiles that they can use to attack targets in Crimea from Ukraine. Recently, the port city of Sevastopol witnessed another drone attack, marking a beginning of efforts to weaken Russian strength. The attack follows a series of similar incidents that took place over the summer. This development has sparked concern among Ukrainian officials who have asked the United States to supply them with longer-range missiles, which are known as the ATACMS, so that they can mount these missiles by USA on their highly effective HIMARS launchers, making it easier for them to strike targets in Crimea while still being in the Ukraine. Why the politics over Crimea is so tricky? The difficulties Ukraine faces with regards to Crimea are not limited to military issues, but as always there are some regions in Ukraine that show pro-Russian sentiments, and it is believed that these sentiments, which are pro-Russian, are much more widespread in Crimea. If we date back to history, we see that the region boasts a larger population of ethnic Russians compared to the rest of Ukraine, and its connection to Ukraine dates back to when Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev transferred it from Russia to Ukraine in 1954, when both were part of the Soviet Union. This historical context has been acknowledged by numerous observers, with prominent figures such as Elon Musk highlighting it in his widely talked about peace plan tweet. In 2014, Russia occupied Crimea, but the international community doesn't recognize it as a legitimate move. The Ukrainians have been speaking up about how a majority of Crimeans voted for independence in 1991 when Ukraine became independent. At the time, Russia agreed to respect Ukraine's new borders but did not really confine to its promise. Things have changed a lot in Crimea over the past 8 years. According to the numbers, there are now more people who consider themselves Russian living in the area. Around 150,000 Ukrainian residents left the peninsula, while the same number of people moved from Russia to the region. And with Russian rule and media dominating the area, it's hard to say whether a Ukrainian takeover would bring the same excitement seen in other parts of Ukraine that were freed. A Ukrainian deputy prime minister, Olha Stefanishyna, said that the population of Crimea is vastly different than what we saw 8 years ago. We can conclude that this can be due to the soft power Russians had over Crimea. Will US and NATO support this offensive? There was a time when the US-led Western alliance was working together in Ukraine. They had some tough moments, but their goal was to help Ukraine to fight against Russia. The US and NATO alliance did their best to support Ukraine through their logistic support, but they are still hesitant to engage with Russia in a direct offense. However, things changed when Russia took over Crimea. Russians saw this as their land, and losing it would be a big loss for them. Russia takes Crimea as a holy land due to its connection with Orthodox Christianity, so they think of it as their right to rule over Crimea and make it a part of Russia. Some experts are worried that if Ukraine tries to take back Crimea, things could get even more dangerous. The question is, would Putin, the president of Russia, would ever use nuclear weapons to keep Crimea? The experts say there are many things that Russia could use to make the situation even worse, such as anti-space technology. If Ukraine tries to take back Crimea, it would also make the war longer and consequences could be worse. But as per the sentiments of Ukrainians, the annexation of Crimea with mainland is the only possible way to end this conflict, and this is how they call it the conquest of their nation. We hope you found this informative. Let us know your thoughts in the comment below, and as always, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Thanks for watching.